Well, hello. Welcome back to my channel. Just Shauna here to talk about some friggin' books. You guys are gonna be excited. We've got some Sookie series updates today. The rant is forthcoming. Don't forget that you now can become a member of my channel if you are able to and feel so inclined. Do not feel obligated to do so. There is a button down below right by the subscribe button that says join. If you click that, you will see a list of the tiers and the pricing and the different perks available if you become a member. But as always, your viewership support, like support, comment support, all of that is greatly appreciated. Let's get right into this. First up is book 12 of frickin' Sookie, Deadlocked by Charlaine Harris, adult, paranormal, fantasy. The mystery of this one, that's all these books have, like a big mystery we're trying to solve, usually involving a dead body. It was so convoluted and flimsy and illogical, like I can't even begin. I don't care to begin. Sookie wasn't quite so judgmental and bitchy toward other women here, so it was less obnoxious for that. She was still very hypocritical and self-centered as all fuck. But the biggest thing with this book was, and this has been through the series, I've mentioned this with a couple other books, there's some bits of racial insensitivity, to say the least, and just stereotyping, prejudices, etc. But the racial insensitivity in this book, like truly towards the end, I was truly taken back twice, where I was like, we really said that? We really did that. So like, warning for racial insensitivity here. The first part where I was like, okay, Sookie was having a bad time. She's always having a bad time. Bullshit's always happening to her. Woe is me. Oh my God. Whatever. But then she gets some good news. So she's overwhelmed with being happy about this. And it says, I put my head on the table and swore in a happy way. And warning for racial insensitivity toward Indigenous folks, Native Americans. Then she says, this past 24 hours had been my personal trail of tears. No more. Bitch. I don't know. I'm not Native. I'm not Indigenous. But I just feel like that was not a good choice to compare you having a bad day to the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears. And if you don't know what the Trail of Tears is, Google. It was not a fucking good time for Native American folks. So that was not cute at all. I was just like, again, I'm not Native, I'm not Indigenous, and I'm not trying to be like a white savior or something. If you're Indigenous, if you're Native, let me know if I'm way off base here. But yeah, I just feel like that's not a good metaphor to make. And then this is just straight up racial slur toward a black man. It's not the one you think, at least, I guess, but no, like this is not any better. I'm not even gonna say it because I don't want to say it. So how will I explain? And this is a character who's like a bad character, right? This character has been for a couple books in here as like a side character that Sookie hates and thinks that she's a bitch. It's a female character who Sookie just hates and who's like evil. We already have it established that she's a bitch, she's not nice, she's kind of homicidal, whatever, right? This was so fucking unnecessary is my biggest, I mean, the verbiage in general, why, but it just wasn't necessary. We already know that this character is a piece of shit, right? She's not a good person. So she's gonna fight a guy who is black, and he says, I'll kill you. And then she says, try, and calls him a tropical forest. What's another word for a tropical forest, right? It starts with a J. And then another word for rabbit. So she calls him blank blank. Try blank blank. And I just, why the fuck? Why the fuck? Like, I legit was like, what? Like, I set the book down for a minute being like, did I just read that? And I'm not saying you can't ever have a character use a racial slur if there is some point to it, I guess. Like, if it's done in a certain way, if it's called out on the page, if this character being racist is some big part of the plot or the character development or some shit, like there's some point to this, right? Like I said, it was already established that this character was bad. She's a bad character. She's evil, blah. We didn't need this thrown in there. And it wasn't checked. Nobody said shit. Like, we just don't talk about it. We just act like she didn't say that. No one is shocked. No one else in the book is like, oh, what the fuck? Did you just call him that? No one says anything. It's just, why? Why did it need to be there? It didn't. So, yeah, that's a thing. And on my 1 to 10, I gave this a 3.42, which is 1 Pushina quart. Oh, it just keeps dwindling. On a much better note, the next book I finished was Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova. I'm gonna set it up here because it's heavy. This is young adult fantasy. It's in a like Spanish Inquisition era fantasy world. Like, it's inspired by that type of world. There is a group of people who are they're like a different nationality. There's originally like all these different kingdoms, all these different countries, and the people of this one land are born with these magical abilities. But then we have a royal family from a different land who is going everywhere and conquering and colonizing, and they do not like these people with these magical abilities, so they're trying to essentially wipe them out. The main character's name is Renata, which I love because that is my mother's name. And Renata is a Robaria, which means she has the ability to steal people's memories. As a child, she lived in the palace for many years until she was taken by the Whispers, which is basically this rebel spy group of Maria. They are fighting to get their sacred lands back, as well as fighting for the freedom and equality of their people. Renata's love, Des, who is a fellow Whisper, he gets taken captive, and Renata finds herself back at the palace playing a very dangerous game of trying to convince her previous captors that she didn't want to leave in the first place. I really enjoyed the writing style of this book. It was very descriptive, but without being too much, in my opinion. When things were described, it was very lush and vivid, and I could see everything so clearly. And this world is beautiful. A couple of times, the foreshadowing was a bit heavy-handed, where you could kind of see things coming, but I didn't really care. The way it was written, even if I did see a reveal kind of coming, the way it was written, when it was revealed, I still was like invested and like, oh my God, they're gonna find out. I was still excited, you know? And there were still a few times where I was caught off guard. Renata is a conflicted character a lot of the time. She definitely had some Stockholm syndrome when she was younger and was being kept at the palace. So being back at the palace now with people who cared for her and spoiled her as a child, and she knows that they were doing it for their own gain, but she still has those fond memories. She's got a very complex relationship with not only people at the palace, but also people in the Whispers, because she's so rare and her magic is so scary to them and unpredictable. So she isn't exactly welcomed into the Whispers and treated well. So she has a complex relationship with people from both sides. I didn't necessarily find myself super invested in Renata as a character. I don't know why, but this book was still such a page turner for me. I will definitely be reading the next book. I think it is going to be published next year. I don't know when. On my 1 to 10, I gave it a 7, which translates to 4 pushinicorns. Next, I finished Breath of Fire by Amanda Bouchet, book 2 of the Kingmaker Chronicles. This is adult fantasy romance. In this book, we have Greek mythology, very heavily present, but it's mixed in with a made-up world and a lot of magic. It's the second book, so I won't go too far into plot stuff, but our team is on a quest for the larger mission. They have bigger goals than before, so the stakes are definitely higher than before. Much more sex. In the first book, it was like a lot of sexual tension up until towards the end, when the characters, got together. Now they're together, and so we start off like in chapter 1, and then throughout the book, they're just, anytime they can, they're banging. And there is more aggressive alpha male stuff, and again, it didn't really bother me, except in the very beginning, the first scene, it did kind of bother me, because there was a lot of the main man angrily throwing stuff around, breaking furniture in front of the female main character. And he wasn't necessarily like pissed off at her. It was like I'm mad because I love you so much, because I care about you so much, and you put yourself in danger. Like one of those angry tantrums. But still, you are expressing your anger in a physical way in the vicinity of this woman. That is like an abusive tactic, so I'm not a big fan. And the overprotectiveness also started to grate on my nerves a little bit from the male main character towards the female main character. And now I will say that later on, you do find out some things that kind of reveals why he was being like that. He did have a reason for being so overprotective, but as the reader, for most of the book, you don't know this, so it got annoying. But I did appreciate that the main character, Kat, at one point, she was like, bro, fucking stop. Like, quit with this overprotective bullshit. You're driving me nuts. Also, Kat's inner monologue that we get sometimes, in the first book, it didn't really bother me. I saw negative reviews of people being like, this is so cheesy, I can't deal with it. And I started to feel kind of that way in the second book. There are parts, here's one, but it's not like a big one, but Griffin squeezes me, come back to me, don't do anything foolish. And then in italics, it's like her inner monologue, me? And then she says out loud, I'm never foolish. But that like, me? What? Oh my God. Like it's all throughout, and sometimes it was a bit cheesy, but I don't know. With these books, there might be things about the romance that rub me the wrong way. Also, the sex. I like the sex scenes, but the spanking references when they're not having sex, oh God, I hate it. I hate it so much. Yeah, like, I don't know. In the midst of having sexy times, do some spanking. Do you. If that's what gets your rocks off, have at it. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. And like there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that people can say during sex that outside of that environment is so cringy. And that's how I feel about like the spanking references. Like, I'm gonna spank you until your bottom's red later. That's not literally what was said in the book. But like, if you're not in the middle of having sex and you're saying shit like that, it's so cringy to me. I hate it. Oh God, I'm just like, no, don't say it while we're just like walking along this trail. Like, oh, you're so hot, I want to spank you later. Like, ew, no. But what I was saying is, even though there's some elements that I'm like, oh God, I legit love the fantasy elements of these books. I love Greek mythology. And I like a character who's like super powerful. So there's so much about these books that I thoroughly enjoy. I just have a fun time with them. And the actual sex scenes, I do enjoy also. And it just, the whole alpha male, fated mates, soulmates type of thing. I love those tropes, specifically like the fated mates and soulmate thing. It just speaks to the hopeless romantic in me. In real life, I'm not necessarily that way. I am a bit of like a romantic, but I'm not necessarily of the belief that there are soulmates and things like that. But yeah, I just have this part of me that's this hopeless romantic that I just eat up these types of stories and these types of romances when we have two people that are just like, I will die for you and wait for you in hell until you come there. And like just this overly dramatic, like passionate, whatever. Oh, I love it. I live for it. On my 1 to 10, I gave this a 6.85, which translates to 3.5 Pushinicorns. And then, you guys, book 13, the final book of the Sookie Stackhouse series, Dead Ever After. I finished this bitch. Oh, finally! So, number 1, Sookie was far less obnoxious and hypocritical and judgmental and all that shit in this book. And in the last book, I mentioned that she wasn't quite so annoying. She was almost back to beginning of the series Sookie for me, which from my memory, I enjoyed. But more on that in a minute. And spoilers for the end of this series here. Sam was also less annoying as a character, but I was annoyed that they fucking ended up together, because if Sam, throughout the whole series, had been the Sam of this book, I probably would have been happy that they were together. Because in this book, it made sense, they were cute, it worked, but I couldn't get out of my head how Sam was through the rest of the series. And as you know, I just found him annoying in the rest of the series. He was kind of stupid. So it just felt a bit anticlimactic. However, it's still better than the TV series ending where she ended up with a nameless, faceless guy just thrown in at the end. Literally, you don't see his face. Just some fucking guy. What the fuck? So back to non-spoiler stuff, but the plot was convoluted as all hell, and Sam in this book even said so at one point. She is explaining to him, like, this has all been happening to me lately, Sookie is, and Sam is like, that sounds really convoluted. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Because it fucking is. And holy God, the most cliched bad guys ever. Oh, Jesus Christ. Just cardboard cutouts of, like, evil bad guy who hates women. It was so cringy. A major problem that I have with this series, I mean, I have a lot. Like, yes, it's obviously about Sookie. It's literally called the Sookie Stackhouse series, and it's also called the Southern Vampire series and the True Blood series, but mostly the Sookie Stackhouse series. She's the main character. It's her point of view in every book. But in the first couple of books, we were introduced to these vampire characters and this vampire world, right? And they were totally the focal point in Sookie's world. That's how we got to know Sookie, is through the lens of her interacting with these vampires. And we're made to believe by Sookie that her life prior to this, her normal life, was kind of garbage. She never dated because she couldn't date human men because she can hear everything they say, and that was miserable for her, or hear everything they think. And people thought she was a weirdo and kind of treated her strangely, like she was this odd duck. And her life was fine, but also kind of not. And so getting to know her after she meets these vampires, and it's through the lens of Sookie in this vampire world, it was fun and adventurous and exciting and kind of dangerous sometimes, but cool. And we were made to really ship her with either Bill or Eric. Like, those were the dudes. Those were the main options. That anybody who talks about this series, they want to know, are you Bill or Eric, right? Those are the two main guys, these vampires. But then as the series went on, for me anyways, it felt like the rug was kind of getting pulled out from under me as far as what I had signed up for versus what I was actually getting as the series went on. I signed up for fun vampire times, this girl getting more involved in the vampire world and dating vampires and all of this stuff. And it turned into, oh, this poor girl just wants to live a normal life. Again, her normal life wasn't that great. And I mean, I guess you could make the argument of maybe she didn't realize how great it was until she saw this other thing, I suppose. Spoilers, again, briefly, for who she ends up with at the very end of the series. Her ending up with a guy who already was in her life before the start of the first book. For years, he was already in her life. It kind of made me feel like, what was the point of these 13 books? And it's like 2 or 3 years of her life that we're following her for, with like fun, paranormal, supernatural adventure stuff. And then she just ends up with this guy who was already in her life. And yeah, he's supernatural too, but I don't know. What was the point of all of this? Is how I feel. What was the point? It just kind of felt like a story of a girl kind of has a boring, sort of crappy life, normal life, where people don't treat her that great. Let's give her a bunch of trauma and more trauma, and then just plop her right back off where she started. Why? For what? And yeah, things happened. She grew, she learned, yada, 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 I guess. I don't know. It just felt anticlimactic to me. So before I do my rant about Sookie, I'm actually going to reread the first 2 to 4 books. We'll see with the first 2 how I feel, but those first 4 books I gave 4 stars, and then it just started to go down from there. But it was a little while ago since I started this whole series reread. I think it was sometime last year, like maybe a full solid year ago, because I read the first couple and then I kind of like didn't do anything with it for a minute, and then I picked it up again. And so I kind of want to see if I truly feel like those first few books were better and more solid and Sookie was less annoying, or if my nostalgia was just getting in the way and that I didn't really start picking up on these annoyances until book 5, 6, etc. They're very quick reads. I've had a lot of people comment in the comment section and like on Twitter and stuff when I talk about it, saying like, girl, why are you torturing yourself? It's really not torturing myself, honestly, because they are such quick, easy reads. Reading through these first couple books will probably take me a couple days. So it's really not that big of a deal. This one I did rate slightly higher than the last one, simply because, like I said, Sookie was way less annoying, and the romance, even though I'm frustrated by it, it was a little better. It was better than I guess I was anticipating. So there's that. On my 1 to 10, I gave it a 4.42, which translates to 2 pushinicorns. I wanted to briefly talk about this book because I mentioned it to you guys before. After Dead, the What Came Next in the World of Sookie Stackhouse. I thought that this was a novella about what came next. Never had opened the book, not one time. Yeah, it's actually like a glossary. It's like an alphabetical order of all the fucking characters ever in the series, basically. Like random characters that you saw one time in one scene. And some of them are like a little more in depth. And then some are Hank Clearwater contracted gonorrhea. Why did I need to know that? I didn't. So this was pointless. I'm not even giving this a rating. I opened it up and was like, oh, that's what this is? Shit. There we have it. Those are the books that I have read more recently. As always, thank you so much for your time. Hope that you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.